very famous thinker, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote his famous, wonderful volume called Democracy in America. And he was very prescient, he predicted that, modern governments, in promising people security and comfort, could become effectively what he called soft despots, right? Softly despotic, meaning that instead of relying on, the police coming to your home and, knocking your door and rounding you up, they would just get compliance by regulating the hell out of people's lives. And so that, people's initiative and creativity would be destroyed by having to go through bureaucratic hurdles for everything they did. And so hyper-regulation of people's lives by the state, I think in a way can really enervate them, or it can really kind of reduce their energy, and it can reduce their creativity, and it can it can infantilize them. And so I think technocracy in itself can feed on itself by creating habits of compliance with minute rules, complicated rules, and in some ways I think I agree, people seem to be more open to technocratic control of their lives, but there are other people who are resisting and pushing back, and we shouldn't forget that. There are pretty strong resistance movements in places like the United Kingdom, and peaceful resistance movements, and populist movements as well that are, anti-establishment and anti-technocracy. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are some signs of resistance to these kinds of tendencies in democracy.
So absolutely, I wholly agree with you. One of the things that this whole pandemic has exposed to me, and has been a topic of many shows, or at least one of the topics of many shows I've done, has been just this realization that I've had that some of us are easily propagandized, and we can come to believe things which are, when you sit down and really think about it for a moment, wrong, right? But yet we can pick up through it being in the popular culture and being pushed out through, let's say social media and media, or, many, many mechanisms at once. We can come to believe things which, upon reflection, don't really make a ton of sense. And so we live in a society where, some portion of us, and we sometimes without even knowing at all, believe in things which another portion of the population doesn't. And so the idea is, you want people to have, a common set of knowledge, a common set of facts, right? You can't have alternative facts, right? Facts are facts, right? But that's not where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is inherently anti-philosophical. It's anti-reflection. It's anti-thinking. It's anti-freedom to present people with a very rigid worldview that they should accept on faith, essentially, because it's unchallenged, and it's sort of authoritative, right? So we should accept it. What you're talking about points also to the fact that our societies are quite polarized and divided, and that there is disagreement over fundamental issues that affect how we live together, that affect how we run our society, how we regulate our society. And so the prospects of creating a feasible political system that we can all inhabit together seem pretty poor. And here I think decentralization plays a really critical role. And not only territorial decentralization, but also things like, school vouchers, so that people can select the kind of school they want to go to and want their children to attend, to have some control over the social world. So I would argue that precisely because our society is so diverse, because there's so much disagreement and conflict, moral, cultural, religious. Precisely for that reason, we should try to facilitate people to organize and to join communities that, broadly speaking, can agree on fundamental issues concerned with how they live together. And so, yes, of course, you need an overarching constitution and some kind of a regulatory framework. But I would argue that that regulatory framework that is like an umbrella within which all these communities can exist should be minimalist. It should go to the bare minimum of non-aggression, some kind of, rules against criminal conduct, some rules about public order, so that communities can then develop their own life in their own way. And they don't all have to be celebrating a gay way of life, and they don't all have to be against a gay way of life. I mean, in a way, we have to understand that it's a practical issue. It's a practical problem. It's not about deciding what the best and most ideal society is going to be. It's about how do we get these people, as they are, to be able to, interact with each other, engage in a common market, pass each other in the street. That's not going to happen if we think that all of the important moral and cultural issues have to be settled for everyone in a state. It's just not going to happen. It'll only polarize the population, and it'll accelerate the demise of that society.
Well, I mean, inherently, some people would be, forced to take on a set of values, right, in this type of context.
It would end up being that either a majority or a powerful political faction, which may be just a strong minority or a powerful minority, would end up dictating the terms of our common life in a way that goes completely against the will and the interests and the opinions of the rest of the society. And they would feel trapped. And when people feel trapped, they become resentful, bitter, angry. And it's a recipe for an unstable society, inherently unstable and explosive. People get complacent about democracy, about Western democracy, and they think, oh, well, we don't see bombings in the street. But I think that's a mistaken attitude because ultimately, underneath the veneer of peace and respect, there can be a lot of tension and resentment. And if you allow it to bubble, to just sort of develop over time, there will come a time when it explodes. And democracy relies on mutual respect and on recognition of the legitimacy of our shared institutions. And so if those institutions become polarized or only are perceived to represent the ideological or economic interests of a special class of people, then many citizens will just switch off and will defect. And they'll reluctantly go along with what they're told to do until they see an opportunity to overturn those institutions. That sounds dramatic to say it that way, but I do think, and I would say the United States is on course for a form of dismemberment if these issues are, if people attempt to resolve these issues at the federal level. It's a recipe for dismembering the United States.
Don't forget to subscribe to our Alerts newsletter, and you'll never miss an episode.